So today's video podcast is a query. Who holds greater lawmaking power, the legislature or the people, and why? Do elected members of the California state legislature or the people of the great state of California enjoy greater lawmaking power? Hopefully the California Constitution answers the question. As you know, it provides three branches of government, like the federal government, as well as the rights of direct democracy. In fact, Article 3, Section 3 provides the separation of powers among the three branches of state government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Article 2 concerns voting. It also includes the three forms of direct democracy in this state: initiative, referendum, and recall. Section 1 of Article 2 says all political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their protection, security, and benefit, and they have the right to alter or reform it when the public good may require. So again, Article 2 of the California Constitution grants the people all political power. What's the definition of political power then? A number of other states, such as Utah and New Jersey, uses the same language in their constitution as California does. Do we know if it's broader or narrower than legislative power? The term political power is used in Article 2, which is obviously different than the legislative power that's used in Article 4. So Article 4 of our state constitution concerns the legislative branch of government, and specifically Section 1 of Article 4 provides the following. The legislative power of this state is vested in the California legislature, which consists of the Senate and Assembly, but the people reserve to themselves the powers of initiative and referendum. So Article 4 grants the legislative power to the legislature, but reserves the power of initiative and referendum to the people. So Article 4 gives the legislative power to the legislature. So what's the definition of legislative power, and is it broader or narrower than the political power granted in Article 2? You know, it's often stated by the California Supreme Court that the legislature has plenary lawmaking authority in the state that is only limited by the state constitution, which we often note is different than the United States Constitution, which grants specific powers to the US Congress. So if Congress doesn't have a specifically enumerated power, then it lacks it. California's legislature has all power except which is limited by the Constitution. Among those powers, the legislature can obviously enact statutes. They can also propose constitutional amendments, which ultimately have to be voted on by the people. So is this more power than what the people have, or is it less, or is it equal? Again, Article 4 reserves to the people the powers of initiative and referendum. The initiative is the power to propose both statutes and constitutional amendments. The referendum is the power to repeal all or part of a statute that's been enacted by the governor and legislature. So some view the legislative branch as being the most powerful of the three branches because it's in charge of making the laws, and they can override a gubernatorial veto, and they help control state spending through the budget process. In California, the voters in the legislature obviously share some power, and the courts in the state have generally viewed the legislature again as having plenary power over lawmaking, but it is limited by the provisions of the Constitution. And one of those limits is the power of the electorate through the initiative and referendum processes. So the California Supreme Court in 1995, in the case of Rossi versus Brown, said the following: the only express constitutional limitations on the people's exercise of the statewide initiative power are those in sections 8 and 12 of Article 2. Section 8D of Article 2 bars initiative measures from embracing more than one subject. That is the so-called single subject rule. And Section 12 of that article bars constitutional amendments and statutes which name any individual to hold any office or identify any private corporation to perform any function. I would note that there are other limitations. For example, 4 types of statutes that take immediate effect are not subject to a referendum. So referendum power is not absolute. So based on this, our state's high court here in California views the electorate as having fewer limitations on its lawmaking power than those that are imposed on the legislature. In fact, the Supreme Court in the Rossi case cited that the people's reserved power of initiative is greater than the power of the legislative body. Now, one could also state that the voters have plenary power over lawmaking and can pursue an initiative regarding any appropriate topic that can be addressed by initiative. As a result, both the voters and the legislature do in fact share the power of lawmaking in the state of California. But again, I pose the original question, is one body more powerful than the other? And can either body overrule the other? One view is because the voters can enact a constitutional amendment directly by initiative, that the voters have greater power to make laws than the legislature, which can only propose constitutional amendments and place them before the voters to vote on. Also, there are probably fewer limits on the voters' power than there are on the legislature in Article 4. And the voters can effectively repeal a statute or preclude the legislature from acting in an area through the referendum process. And some commentators have also pointed to the fact that an initiative statutory measure, so an initiative that enacts statutes, cannot be amended or repealed by the legislature unless the initiative actually provides that power, which some do, generally with language that requires a supermajority threshold, and that any amendments further the purposes of that ballot measure. So taken together, most legal commentators would share the view of the Cal Supreme Court in the Rossi case, that the people's power of initiative is greater than the lawmaking power of the legislature.